"You're evicting your son!" Jason shouted, gripping the notice like it burned. Elaine didn't flinch. "You locked your mother out of her own house." Sabrina burst in, eyes wild. "This is elder abuse." Elaine slid the deed across the table. "This is me reclaiming oxygen." Jason's voice cracked. "We have nowhere to go." Elaine turned to the door. "Then start where I did, with nothing but nerve." "All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from." The front door didn't open all the way. Elaine had to press her shoulder into it, hard, the edge catching on an uneven rug someone had folded over itself. She steadied herself with her cane, wincing as her newly replaced hip protested the movement. The air inside was warm, bright, too bright for eyes still blurred from weeks of hospital lighting and pain meds. No one came to greet her. She stood in the foyer, suitcase wheels silent on the tile, letting the scent of lemon cleaner and eucalyptus wash over her. She remembered picking that scent herself, back when this was just a modest two-bedroom investment property, before it became their home. "Mom," Jason's voice came from the hallway, surprised, like she'd arrived unannounced. He was in socks and gym shorts, hair damp, probably from a mid-morning shower. "We thought you'd be here around noon." Elaine checked her watch. "It's 11:45. "Oh." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Right. Okay. Well, welcome back. How was the hospital?" "Sterile," she replied. "Functional, not warm." Jason gave her a half-smile. "You made it, though. That's what matters." Sabrina appeared at the top of the stairs, phone still in hand, her smile 2 seconds delayed and not meant for Elaine. "Hey, you're here," she said flatly, descending with perfectly balanced steps in cream slippers. "So here's the thing. We've been working hard to keep the guest suite tidy just in case we needed it for, entertaining or emergencies." Elaine didn't reply. She knew a pitch when she heard one. "So we figured the basement's best for you," Sabrina continued. "It's already got the pull-out and a little space heater. Private bathroom, too." Elaine blinked slowly. "The basement." Sabrina nodded, as if Elaine had misunderstood a generous offer. Jason chimed in, awkward. "We've been airing it out. It's fine down there now." Elaine looked past them, to the hallway that led to the sunlit guest suite she'd paid to renovate 2 summers ago. She remembered choosing the pale blue curtains, the glass knobs on the dresser, the memory foam mattress she'd ordered online when her husband's back started to give out. But now, apparently, it was off limits. She gripped the handle of her suitcase, cane in her other hand. Her scar ached, her chest burned, quietly. "I'll get settled," she said softly. She turned without waiting and made her way down the narrow basement steps, each one taken like an insult she refused to show she felt. The pull-out creaked beneath its own weight. The air was heavy, stale with dust and the faint memory of damp winters. No window light, just a buzzing wall sconce and the hollow sound of the upstairs footsteps. She sat slowly. The heater in the corner was off. Elaine closed her eyes for a moment. She was a woman who'd buried a husband 6 months ago, had surgery 4 weeks ago, and had given up this house rent-free to the only child she ever had. That had all seemed like love, like generosity. Now it felt like a transaction no one intended to repay. Upstairs, laughter echoed. Sabrina's voice, sharp and careless, filtered down through the vents. "She's here already. Yeah, I know. But don't worry. She'll be gone in 2 weeks." Silence. Then more laughter. Elaine didn't move, just listened. Her hand rested on her cane. The handle was smooth, polished. Her husband had ordered it for her on Etsy, insisted on the one with the cherry wood. She stood with a quiet grunt, walked to the small desk in the corner, and pulled open her laptop. It booted slowly. She waited. With steady fingers, she opened the county property portal, typed in the address, scrolled, checked the deed. Her name was the only one listed. Still. Elaine let out a long, slow breath. Then she smiled, just barely. Not soft, not warm, the kind of smile that comes right before a storm. The scent of frying bacon hit her before the sound did. Elaine opened her eyes to the faint hum of voices upstairs, muffled, casual, and unfamiliar. Not Jason, not Sabrina, She sat up slowly, the cheap pull-out groaning beneath her, and felt the weight of another morning pressing down like the basement ceiling itself. The floorboards above creaked as chairs scraped. Someone laughed. A woman, loud and easy, the kind of laugh that fills a room where it feels welcome. Elaine pulled on her cardigan, adjusted the cane beside the bed, and stood. The basement was still cold. Her slippers padded softly over the cement floor. She switched off the space heater she'd finally managed to get working the night before. It gave off more noise than warmth anyway. A single dusty window near the ceiling let in a sliver of weak Sacramento sunlight, slicing the mildew-tinted air. Upstairs, the front door opened and closed. Footsteps, giggles. Then Sabrina's voice, cheerful now. "Fresh berries and brioche, only the best for my girls." Elaine stared at the ceiling. The guest suite was just above her, its vents angled to release the smell of lavender detergent and citrus polish. She'd picked that scent combo deliberately, clean but not clinical, elegant, thoughtful. She could still picture the invoice, $18,420 for the remodel. New floors, crown molding, designer bedding. Her husband had helped pick the wallpaper, back when he could still climb a ladder. A delicate fern print, the color of still water. And now it belonged to Sabrina's brunch club. Elaine climbed the basement stairs carefully, pausing to catch her breath at the top. The door creaked open. She walked into the kitchen. Sabrina looked up from the island, eyes narrowing slightly. Her mouth smiled, but her posture didn't. "Oh, morning," she said, already turning back to slice strawberries. "Didn't know you were up." 3 women sat at the dining table, each with a glass of orange juice. Nobody looked in Elaine's direction. Jason entered from the hallway, still in his work polo, tie in hand. "Mom," he said quietly, pulling her aside. "Look, could you maybe just give us the morning? You being in here kind of changes the energy." Elaine blinked at him. "You mean it makes things awkward?" He sighed. "You know that's not how I meant it." "No," she said, voice even. "That's exactly how you meant it." Jason looked down. "It's just a brunch, Mom." "No," she repeated, softer this time. "It's not." She turned and walked back through the living room, cane tapping a steady rhythm. The guest suite door was cracked open. From where she stood, she could see a fresh vase of tulips on the nightstand. The bed was fluffed and perfectly made, the kind of welcome that didn't cost much but meant everything. She closed the door gently. By late afternoon, Beverly arrived. Her old friend pulled into the driveway in her reliable silver Ford, face already wrinkled with concern by the time Elaine opened the door. "Where's the guest suite?" Beverly asked, hauling in a tote bag. "I brought lavender oil for your pillow." Elaine held the door a little longer than necessary. "Downstairs." Beverly stopped mid-step. "You're kidding." Elaine said nothing, just nodded toward the basement. It took 10 minutes of small talk and passive-aggressive silence before Beverly stood up from the sagging pullout and said, "This is not okay." Elaine gave her a tired smile. "You think I don't know that?" That evening, the brunch crowd long gone, Elaine climbed the stairs again, this time without asking. Sabrina sat at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up. "I'd like to book the suite," Elaine said calmly. Sabrina blinked. "What?" Elaine placed both hands on the countertop, steady. "The guest suite. I'd like to stay there." Sabrina gave a short, incredulous laugh. "You can't be serious." "I am," Elaine replied. "And don't worry, I'm not asking for a favor. Full rate, cash transfer in advance. That's the rule, right?" Sabrina opened her mouth, but no words came out. Elaine left her standing there. She didn't look back. Instead, she made her way to the living room couch and slowly sat down beside Beverly, who was sipping tea like it was vodka. "Did you just—" Elaine nodded once. "I made a reservation." Beverly grinned. "You're not done yet, are you?" Elaine's lips curved, but there was no amusement in it, only certainty. "Not by a mile." Elaine clicked, "Remove account holder," and didn't blink. It was the PG&E portal first. Water, gas, electricity. All bills she'd set up in her name 10 years ago when she'd first handed Jason the spare key and told him, "Use it if you ever need it." Back then, it felt like an act of love. Now, it felt like cutting a rope that had been slowly strangling her. Each click brought a kind of quiet satisfaction. Not anger, precision. She confirmed the disconnection dates and let the system schedule its polite little warnings. 30 minutes later, she was off every utility, every bill, every auto-pay. The screen flashed confirmation. Account terminated. "You want me to make coffee or just frame that?" Beverly asked from the couch, flipping through the thick binder they'd started to call the undoing file. Elaine didn't look up. "Frame it." They moved on to insurance next. Elaine sat with a glass of water in one hand and her laptop in the other as she clicked through her healthcare proxy settings. Jason's name had been there ever since her gallbladder surgery 6 years ago. Emergency contact, medical decisions, delete, confirm, save. Next was car insurance. Sabrina had been listed as a backup driver, just in case Elaine remembered adding her after Sabrina's Civic broke down one winter, trying to help them cut costs. Elaine clicked again. Remove, confirm, save. By noon, the entire digital framework of dependents had crumbled. Beverly leaned over, typing names into a spreadsheet as fast as Elaine recited them. "What are we calling this?" Beverly asked, tapping the title cell. Elaine thought for a moment, then smiled. "No more free rides." By evening, the reactions started coming in. First, a flicker in the upstairs hallway. Jason fiddling with the thermostat, his voice rising through the vent. "Why's it still cold? Didn't we pay the heating?" Sabrina yelled from the kitchen. "It's not working. The water's barely warm either." Elaine sat in the guest suite with the space heater Beverly had brought over from her own house, sipping chamomile tea and reading over eviction statutes like they were bedtime stories. She had bookmarked the state's renter removal laws, highlighted the process for informal tenants, and even printed copies for her lawyer. Her phone buzzed. "Sabrina, this is actually elder abuse." Elaine didn't flinch. She typed slowly. "Elaine, no, this is boundary enforcement." 10 minutes passed, no reply. An hour later, Jason called. She ignored it. He called again, then again. Finally, the hotel lobby called up to her suite. "There's a Mr. Jason Mercer asking to speak with you. Says he's your son?" Elaine set down her mug. "Send him up." When he arrived, his eyes were tired, his hair unbrushed, he hadn't shaved. She opened the door slowly, stepping aside without a word. Jason stood there for a moment, like he didn't recognize her, or maybe didn't recognize himself. "Mom," he said, "look, I know we haven't handled this perfectly, but we're trying." Elaine waited. "We just need a little time," he said, "to figure out next steps. Sabrina's freaking out and His voice cracked. "I just need some runway." Elaine turned to the side table, opened a drawer, and pulled out a single piece of paper. No speech, no judgment. It was a rental application for a small apartment complex near Arden Arcade. Affordable, clean, pet-friendly. She handed it to him. Jason stared at it. "You're giving me an application?" She nodded. "It's time you learned how to fill out the forms." Jason didn't take it. "I'm your son," he said, voice cracking. "You are," Elaine said gently. "But being family doesn't make you entitled. It makes you responsible." He opened his mouth to argue again, but she stepped back toward the door. "Take the paper, Jason. Or don't. But this conversation is over." He finally took it, like it burned. She closed the door without another word. Outside, the hallway was quiet. Inside, Elaine returned to her seat, picked up her tea, and sipped it slowly. The thermostat in her suite was set to 72. Warm, consistent. She opened her binder again and added a new tab. Next, change locks. The video started with a somber piano loop and a selfie frame angled just right to catch Sabrina's tears glistening beneath mascara. "When you've given everything to someone," she said into the camera, her voice trembling, "and they throw you out like garbage, that's not just cruel, that's family betrayal." She let the silence sit for a beat too long before continuing. "My mother-in-law, an elderly woman, has decided to evict me and my husband. No warning, no compassion, just paperwork and cold tea. This is what vengeful boomers look like. Posted on 3 platforms, tagged with hashtags like Toxic Elders and Boomer Revenge, the video gained traction fast. People love a villain, and Sabrina handed them one with shaking hands and glittery thumbnails. Elaine saw it 3 hours after it dropped. She was in the guest suite, finishing a crossword puzzle and reheating her tea when Beverly burst in, phone in hand. "She's weaponized TikTok," Beverly muttered, pressing play. Elaine watched the entire thing without blinking. At the end, she asked, "She edited out the brunch club and the text about me being gone in 2 weeks?" Beverly arched a brow. "Like she was scrubbing a crime scene." Elaine pulled her laptop closer. "Good, then we start with facts." That evening, anonymous comments began to appear under the video. Not defensive, not angry, just quiet, sourced truth. Property deed search, 1 legal owner. Her name is Elaine Mercer. No lease agreement on file, not tenants, that's law, not cruelty. Aging in America doesn't mean being everyone's doormat. Elaine knew exactly what kind of battle this was. It wasn't about truth, it was about perception, and she wouldn't win it with sympathy. But dignity? Dignity could change minds. By the following morning, the comment section had split down the middle. Half the viewers called Sabrina a gold-digging narcissist. The other half accused Elaine of being a heartless elder with control issues. Elaine read each take calmly, sipping her coffee. Beverly had bigger plans. "I called in a favor," she said that afternoon, waving a printout. "My cousin works with the Sacramento Tribune. I pitched them a local story. Senior homeowner reclaims rights against entitled family. They're interested." Elaine hesitated. "I'm not trying to become a martyr." "You're not," Beverly said. "You're just proof that boundary setting isn't cruelty." A week later, the op-ed ran. Beverly's byline, Elaine's story. "Respect isn't inherited. It's earned." The response was fast and different. Older women began resharing the piece with captions like, "We see you, Elaine." Messages trickled into Elaine's inbox. Women in their 60s, 70s, even 80s. Some had given up homes. Others had quietly returned to jobs they thought they'd left behind because family couldn't manage. One wrote, "You gave me permission to stop apologizing." Sabrina's video was still up, but now it carried a different flavor. Her comments thinned. 2 brand accounts quietly untagged her on Instagram. One of her skincare partnerships posted a bland statement, "We believe in mutual respect across generations." Jason, meanwhile, got blindsided at work. Elaine found out from a former student who now managed HR at a mid-sized tech firm downtown. "They saw the video," the student said, voice low, "and the follow-up stories. He didn't violate any policy, technically, but they've moved him to back-end systems, less client-facing." Elaine didn't gloat, but she didn't grieve either. One night she was returning from her evening walk when a woman approached her near the front steps, mid-50s, sharp blazer, city badge hanging from a lanyard. "Elaine Mercer?" "Yes. I'm organizing a community panel next month on elder independence, rights, housing, dignity. We'd love for you to speak." Elaine blinked, surprised. "Me?" The woman smiled. "You've become kind of iconic." Elaine considered it. The part of her that hated attention recoiled, but the part of her that had climbed basement stairs on a fresh surgical wound stood up a little straighter. "I'll think about it." The woman handed her a card. "You'd be doing more than speaking. You'd be reminding people what power really looks like." That night, Elaine wrote 2 sentences in her journal. "They tried to paint me petty, but the frame didn't hold." She closed the book. Tomorrow, the locksmith came. Elaine was in the middle of brushing chamomile into her teacup strainer when her phone pinged with a text from Beverly. "Jason changed the front door lock. Saw it when I drove by. Dumb move." Elaine set the kettle down slowly. Steam curled upward, tracing the line of her jaw as she stared at the message. No panic, just something sharper than anger. Confirmation. By 10:14 a.m., she stood on the front porch in a tailored trench coat, small leather portfolio in hand. Jody, her attorney, stood beside her, phone holstered, a quiet bulldog in black heels. A third figure crouched by the door. Carl from Midtown Locksmith, whistling as he assessed the tampered lock. "They did a sloppy job," he muttered. "Probably bought a $19 kit from Home Depot. You want the smart system?" Elaine nodded once. "Keypad, Cam, the works." "Done in 20. The door opened with a final pop, and the three of them stepped inside. Sabrina was halfway down the stairs, mouth already open. "You can't just waltz in here with some guy and—" Elaine handed her a folded copy of the court order before the sentence could finish. Sabrina didn't read it, just threw her hands up. "You're seriously doing this? Changing the locks like we're squatters?" Jody spoke calmly. "You are." Jason emerged from the hallway behind her, hoodie half-zipped, eyes darting to the locksmith, then to his mother. "Mom, come on, this is extreme." "No," Elaine said. "Locking me out of my own house is extreme." Jason looked down. Sabrina was worried you might escalate things." Elaine's mouth tightened. "Tell me, Jason, how do you escalate after you've been erased?" Carl finished the install in 32 minutes flat. The new locks gleamed, cool and smooth, with digital keypads and a mobile app interface. Carl walked Elaine through twice. She memorized every button. "Where are we supposed to go?" Jason asked quietly, after Carl left. "You're cutting us out completely." Elaine turned to face him, voice calm. "That's not a question I need to answer anymore." Sabrina made a noise like a scoff, but louder, performative, almost theatrical. "You think this makes you noble?" she snapped. "You think you're the victim? We were trying to give you space, and you turned it into a campaign." Elaine's face was unreadable. "Family shows up," she said simply. "You showed me out." Sabrina stormed off, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. Jason didn't move. Elaine placed the portfolio gently on the new side table near the stairs, then retrieved her luggage from the hallway, an elegant navy roller that clicked quietly behind her as she walked toward the guest suite. She paused at the threshold. It was pristine, exactly how she'd built it. The wallpaper her husband had chosen, the quilt she'd hand-stitched in the months after retirement, and now, hers again. She stepped inside and shut the door. That night, for the first time, Elaine slept in her guest suite. No basement mildew, no vent-filtered voices, just soft lamplight, chamomile, and a locked door that answered only to her. She woke early, just as the light cut across the blue-green curtains, and opened her laptop. There it was in her inbox, a confirmation email from Coldwell Banker. Property transfer. Finalized. 319 B. Luther Court, the neighboring duplex. Purchased 2 weeks ago under a trust. Quietly, efficiently. She'd seen the foreclosure notice in the window back in March. Knew no one would bid, and now it was hers. 2 modest units, no frills, just good bones and stable floors. She had plans. She opened a new file, typed the title in bold, new lease criteria, tenants over 60 only, proof of respect required. Her phone buzzed, a new voicemail. She didn't check it. Instead, she walked outside in her robe, coffee in hand, and stared at the duplex across the hedge. 2 vacant porches, 2 blank slates. She smiled. Elaine hadn't opened that closet in almost a year. It was in the smaller bedroom, what used to be the office, then briefly a nursery, then an afterthought of a guest room. Jason and Sabrina had used it for storage, mostly. Empty Amazon boxes, worn yoga mats, an old printer with no cables. She stepped in now, barefoot on the creaky hardwood, morning light angling through half-drawn blinds. The air smelled of dust and lavender dryer sheets. Her hand hovered over the doorknob a moment longer than needed. Then she opened it. Most of it was empty, a few plastic bins on the floor, a broken shoebox balanced precariously on the shelf above. But there, on a single wire hanger, swinging slightly from the shift in air, hung a navy tie with faint silver pinstripes. Her husband's tie. Elaine exhaled without meaning to, knees softening as if the weight of the fabric pulled at her bones. She reached up, fingers trembling now, and touched the silk. He used to wear it to board meetings, always with a white shirt, always perfectly knotted. She'd bought it for him at a Macy's sale, then teased him about being the most handsome, underpaid educator in Sacramento. The tie was still smooth, untouched, unmoved. Jason and Sabrina hadn't even noticed it. Or maybe they had and didn't care enough to take it down. Either way, the message was the same. He doesn't matter here, but he did. To her. Elaine held the tie to her chest and sat on the edge of the bed. Her bed again. Her throat tightened, but she didn't cry. Instead, she closed her eyes and pictured him standing beside her now, sleeves rolled, smirk cocked sideways. "Took 'em long enough to underestimate you," she could almost hear him say. "Now you get to remind them why that was a mistake." She folded the tie gently and placed it on the pillow. Then she stood. The rest of the house was next. Room by room, she moved, not just walking through the spaces, but reclaiming them. The kitchen, where Sabrina used to dominate every countertop with meal prep containers and tiny bottles of oat milk, Elaine cleaned it top to bottom, wiped down the tile with orange-scented cleaner, and played Miles Davis from the Bluetooth speaker. The laundry room, once littered with damp towels and half-used detergent pods, now held her neatly folded linens and her husband's favorite old flannel, worn soft at the elbows. In the hallway, halfway to the staircase, she stopped. A family photo, Jason at 16, braces and a mop of too long hair, her late husband with one arm draped protectively over them both, had been flipped backward in its frame. The glass reflected her now. Silver hair, steady eyes, no illusions left. She turned the photo around and straightened the frame. "Welcome back," she whispered. In the foyer, she placed a small glass vase on the console table. 3 yellow tulips and 1 soft white lily. Fresh, chosen, just for her. Then, at the kitchen island, she opened her leather binder. She called Jody first. "I'm ready to rewrite my will." Jody didn't ask why. By the time they finished the call, Jason and Sabrina were formally removed. A community legal clinic, one Elaine had donated to for decades, was now the primary beneficiary. She stared at the final page. Her pen hovered briefly over her name, then moved with conviction. Next, she picked up her phone again and opened the website for Capital View Behavioral Health. She clicked the Schedule Intake button. Selected Thursday, 1 p.m., not because she was unraveling, but because she wasn't about to drag old ghosts into new beginnings. When the confirmation email arrived, she didn't feel weak. She felt clear. Elaine closed the laptop, rose from her seat, and looked around her house. Not the shell it had become under someone else's entitlement, but the space she had poured her life into. A message blinked on her phone, from a name she hadn't seen in years. Subject line: "Elaine, we saw the article. You belong on a bigger stage." She didn't open it. Not yet. But this time, she smiled. The knock came at 9:06 a.m. Elaine opened the door to find a woman in a tan windbreaker holding a notepad and a DSLR. Her press badge caught the sunlight like a mirror. "Elaine Mercer?" the woman asked, friendly but firm. Elaine gave a small nod. "That's me. I'm Claire with Channel 7. We'd love to do a quick spot, nothing invasive. Just a few shots, maybe a quote. The Tribune op-ed made waves and our viewers are asking questions." Elaine's first instinct was to shut the door. But then she remembered how many women had written her after that article. How many said, "You made me stop apologizing." "Fine," she said, "but let's do it on the lawn. I don't stage my truth." 5 minutes later, she stood in front of the house, shoulders squared, holding the property deed in both hands. The paper was slightly creased at the corners, but the words were crisp. Elaine E. Mercer, sole owner. Claire crouched to get a better angle. "Look right here," she said gently. Elaine stared into the lens, face calm, wind lifting the edges of her silver hair. The story ran that night. A 2-minute segment in the community feature slot. Senior homeowner reclaims rights after being pushed aside by family. They showed her walking the property line, holding her deed, standing beneath the hydrangea bush she'd planted 5 years ago. The shot was quiet, dignified. Her strength not in what she said, but what she didn't have to. By the next morning, her inbox was full. "I didn't know I could fight back. My daughter's husband tried to move into my home rent-free. Your story gave me backbone. They called me stubborn. Now I call myself sovereign. Elaine printed them all, tucked them into the back of her binder. Some of the messages came from as far as Ohio, Maine, Texas. Beverly stopped by that afternoon with a basket of figs and a folded sign wrapped in tissue paper. Elaine raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" Beverly grinned. "Your housewarming gift. Technically, it's your house still, but you just moved back into it." Elaine unwrapped the sign. It was handmade from reclaimed wood, painted a soft cream with stenciled letters. "Respect lives here." She didn't cry, but her fingers lingered on the grain a little too long. They hung it above the entryway, just above the inside of the front door. Not for others, for her. Meanwhile, Sabrina wasn't done. She attempted her own media push, set up a ring light, straightened her hair, and posted a follow-up video titled, "The Real Story." "My mother-in-law doesn't want you to hear." But the algorithm had cooled. Her earlier virality now looked like performance. The comment section barely stirred. One viewer summed it up best. "You weaponized elder abuse as clickbait. We're not buying it anymore." Two of her minor brand sponsors quietly stopped tagging her in posts. A third one issued a vague values clarification statement and dropped her from their affiliate list. Jason fared no better. Elaine never said a word to him about the job, but she knew. A contact at the firm, another former student, had sent her a short, polite message. They moved him off client accounts. Something about personal judgment concerns. He's still employed, just behind the curtain now. Elaine didn't smile at the news. She felt something colder. Completion. That week she sat down at her dining table with a cup of strong black coffee and opened her savings ledger. She earmarked $12,000, quietly, deliberately, and transferred it into a new account. The fund had no name yet, but the purpose was clear: to provide emergency housing grants for elderly tenants being pushed out by their own kin. The next day, she walked into a local credit union and opened the official paperwork. She listed herself as trustee and Beverly as co-signer. Outside the bank, Beverly linked her arm through Elaine's. "You're not just reclaiming your house," she said. "You're building a damn fortress." Elaine looked up at the sky, pale blue, steady. "No," she said quietly. "I'm building an ark." That evening, she received a letter from the mayor's office, an invitation to speak at the Sacramento Civic Hall. Theme: intergenerational boundaries and homeownership justice. She didn't respond. Not yet, but this time, she didn't hesitate to open the envelope. Elaine hadn't stepped inside a courtroom in 23 years. The last time she was testifying for a student being unfairly expelled. Her palms had sweated through her blazer, and her voice cracked on the word unjust. She remembered thinking how sterile it all felt. Oak panels, gray carpeting, a clock that ticked louder than it needed to. Today, the same carpeting ran the length of Department 14 in the Sacramento County Courthouse, worn soft at the center aisle from 2. Many shuffled feet. Elaine sat with her back straight, leather binder balanced on her lap, Beverly beside her like a stone wall in pearls. Across the aisle sat Jason, shoulders folded in like origami. Next to him, Sabrina, dressed like she was auditioning for an apology. Soft pastels, hair pulled back, no makeup except lip gloss. The bailiff called the case. Elaine stood. So did Jody Sloan, her lawyer, calm and focused, one hand already on her folder. The judge was a woman in her 60s. Steel hair, reader glasses, no tolerance for nonsense. Elaine clocked that immediately. It calmed her, oddly. "Petitioner, please present," the judge said. Sabrina's attorney, a sharp young man with a tie too bold for court, launched into it with the tone of someone who watched too much courtroom TV. "Your Honor, my clients lived in this home for over 2 years under implied agreement. They paid for groceries, maintenance. There were verbal promises of permanence. What we have is an emotional tenancy, and we seek either damages or reinstatement of housing rights." Jody didn't even blink. When it was her turn, she stood slowly and opened the binder. "We submit photographic evidence of the living conditions provided to my client," Jody said. text messages confirming temporary stay, no rent paid, no written lease. And here, she slid a copy of the deed onto the table, is the uncontested title, Sole Ownership under Elaine Mercer. She turned a page. And finally, we submit screenshots of social media activity in which the respondent explicitly stated her intent to have the petitioner leave within 2 weeks of her surgery recovery. The courtroom was quiet, but for the shuffle of paper. Jason looked down. Sabrina shifted uncomfortably, whispering something to her attorney. The judge leaned forward. Ms. Mercer, do you wish to say anything? Elaine stood. I loved them. I opened my home to them. That was not consent to be erased inside it. Her voice didn't waver. She sat back down. The judge looked at Jason. Do you have anything to add? Jason opened his mouth, then closed it. He shook his head. Sabrina stiffened. So we're just pretending we weren't family? That feelings don't matter in a court of law? The judge looked at her evenly. Feelings matter in a marriage counselor's office. Here we deal, in fact. A beat passed. The judge tapped her pen once on the bench. Judgment in favor of Ms. Mercer, sole owner, no tenancy, no damages awarded. The respondents are to vacate within 10 business days, or enforcement will proceed. Sabrina's jaw dropped. Jason just nodded, deflated. Also, the judge added, flipping a paper, I've reviewed a recent filing made under the respondent's name. Ms. Sabrina Mercer applied for a second mortgage on this property, listing herself as co-owner. Elaine's head turned slowly. The courtroom didn't breathe. That is not only invalid, the judge continued, it borders on fraudulent misrepresentation. If the lender presses charges, this court will support them. Sabrina paled. That was an error. I didn't. Jason said. The judge cut her off. You may want to retain a criminal attorney. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel struck. Short, final. Sabrina exploded the second they stepped into the hallway. This is insane. She manipulated everything. She's practically smiling while tearing us apart. Elaine said nothing. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder and walked forward. Jason stood off to the side, face pale and unreadable. He didn't follow. Beverly slipped her hand into Elaine's as they reached the elevator. You all right? Elaine didn't answer right away. The doors opened. They stepped inside. I'm not hurt, she said finally, as the elevator doors closed. I'm awake. Below them, the courthouse lobby waited. So did the fallout. The knock was hesitant. 3 soft raps, spaced too wide apart. The kind of knock that didn't want to be answered. Elaine opened the front door slowly. Jason stood there in a wrinkled button-down and worn jeans, holding a cellophane-wrapped bouquet of grocery store flowers, bright, clashing colors with no thought behind them. The stems were already beginning to bend. Hi, Mom, he said, voice flat but rehearsed. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Elaine studied him, the shadows under his eyes, the stubble that looked more like neglect than effort. The hand holding the flowers trembled slightly, but not from remorse, just discomfort. Are you? She said, voice unreadable. Jason opened his mouth, then shut it again. He exhaled hard through his nose. Look, I'm not perfect, I get that. But Sabrina, she panicked, okay? Things got out of hand. It was never about kicking you out, it was just messy. Elaine stepped aside, not to let him in, just enough to move past the screen door and stand on the porch, the spring sunlight warm against her face. She let him finish whatever that was. He held the flowers out like a truce. She didn't take them. Instead, she reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a small white business card. No frills, just a name, a phone number, and the words, Dr. L. Ritchie, licensed family therapist. Jason stared at it. What's this? A first step, she said. You don't get a shortcut to me. Try there first. He blinked, stunned. The silence between them stretched. I miss you, he said finally. Elaine nodded. Then I hope you find your way back, but not through my front door. She turned, walked inside, and closed the door gently. No slam, no drama, just done. She placed the untouched flowers in the compost bin without a glance. Inside, Beverly stood on a ladder near the garage door, drill in one hand and a sleek, motion-sensing security cam in the other. "Last one," she said, giving the lens a slight tilt. "Covers the back gate." Elaine watched her work, grateful in a quiet, uncluttered way. "Thank you. You're not just sealing cracks anymore," Beverly said. "You're building a perimeter." Elaine didn't disagree. That afternoon she opened the file from Jody titled Estate Documents, Revised. Her thumbprint unlocked the PDF. Inside was the new trust agreement. Elaine read every word. The house would convert to a non-profit shelter upon her death. No probate, no risk of inheritance squabbles. The grant fund would cover maintenance, staffing, and emergency services. It was already seated with $12,000. More would come. She signed with a digital pen, Elaine Mercer, trustee. There, permanent. Later, as the sun dipped low and lit the edges of the living room in amber, she found a padded envelope in her mail pile. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar, curved, academic. Inside was a letter on thick parchment, embossed in navy and gold. Department of American History, Lincoln Valley College, Elaine. "We've followed your story. The op-ed, the civic panel. Your name came up in faculty lounge more than once. We're rebuilding our elder empowerment curriculum, and we think you should speak. The students need someone who's lived what we theorize. We can offer a stipend, but honestly, we're hoping you'll say yes just to shake their thinking loose." Elaine smiled. She hadn't walked through that campus in years, hadn't lectured since retirement, but something stirred now. A voice she hadn't heard in herself in a long time. It wasn't ambition. It was utility. She folded the letter neatly and placed it beside her planner. In the foyer, beneath the soft glow of the entry light, the wooden sign hung steady. "Respect lives here tomorrow," she'd call the college, but tonight she poured herself a small glass of red wine, stepped onto her porch, and watched the wind move through the hedges. From the duplex next door came silence. A blank canvas. Ready. Elaine adjusted the microphone with practiced ease. The lecture hall at Lincoln Valley College was standing room only, rows of students, faculty, and a few unfamiliar faces who'd come because they'd heard. Her name had been whispered in policy circles, support groups, even on podcasts. Now here she was, on the same stage where she once taught intro to American civic thought, standing beneath a banner that read, "Resilience and Rights, Aging with Power in Modern America." She didn't read from notes. "I'm not here because I wanted to be. I'm here because I had to fight my way back into my own house, and found a few hundred women standing behind me once I did." Her voice was calm, not soft. There was no apology in it. She spoke of quiet humiliations, being called a guest in the home she owned, being told her time was temporary, hearing laughter through vents she had installed. She told them about the basement with no heat, the tie in the closet that no one had cared enough to move, and the binder labeled house file that grew thicker by the week. She didn't name Jason or Sabrina, not because they deserved anonymity, but because this wasn't about them anymore. It was about every version of them, every name that came after a story beginning with, "My mom let us move in," and ending with silence, resentment, eviction. Elaine closed her speech simply. "We don't age out of ownership, we don't retire from respect, and we damn sure don't need permission to take up space in the homes we built." When she stepped back from the podium, the applause didn't break. It rose. The whole room stood. Elaine blinked slowly, letting it wash over her. But she didn't cry. She nodded, once, deeply. Afterward, they handed her letters, dozens of them. Some handwritten on floral stationery, some typed with margin notes, a few folded napkins with scrawled phone numbers and the words, "Please call my mother." When she returned home that evening, there was a box on her doorstep, painted by hand, the sides covered in tiny, careful brushstrokes of messages from seniors around the state. "I started over at 74 because you did. Your story gave me back my spine. You made me call my daughter and say, 'No more.'" Elaine carried the box into her living room like it was sacred. Across town, Jason and Sabrina packed what little they had into a borrowed van. The mortgage had defaulted on Sabrina's second attempt to leverage their shared home. Creditors had started calling, Jason had burned through favors at work, and Sacramento had grown too tight for them. They left behind no note, just a trail of digital debts and a landlord still waiting on last month's rent. Elaine didn't notice the U-Haul drive off. She was meeting with someone from Community Housing Advocates that morning, an eager woman in her 40s who nearly tripped on Elaine's front step in excitement. "We saw the fund you started," she said, breathless. 12 grand. That's more than most groups get in a year. And if you're serious about converting the duplex—" "I am," Elaine said. The woman paused. "You're not looking for a plaque or anything, are you?" Elaine chuckled. "I'm allergic to plaques. Just help me fill those rooms with people who remember what gratitude sounds like." A month later, the first tenant arrived, a retired bus driver named Margie, who wheeled her single suitcase over the threshold and burst into tears at the sight of clean linens and fresh chamomile in the kitchen. Elaine gave her a key, a welcome folder, and a rule book with 3 simple lines. Be kind. Be honest. This is not a favor. It's a circle. By summer's end, both units in the duplex were filled. Quiet women with decades of noise behind them. No signs on the lawn, no website. Just a warm porch light, a short application, and a little word-of-mouth magic. Elaine's home became something else entirely. Not a headquarters, not a shelter. A symbol. People stopped asking what she had been through. They started asking what they could build like it. That night, Elaine stood in the guest suite, now empty again between rotations. She smoothed the coverlet, fluffed the pillows, left a handwritten note on the side table. You belong here, until you're ready to belong somewhere else. Then she turned off the light, walked downstairs, and opened her inbox. One message stood out, flagged from a national network. Subject: Elaine Mercer. Are you ready for Washington? Elaine pulled the curtains wide in the guest suite and let the morning spill in. The room was still, fresh. Lavender from the sachets tucked into the nightstand mingled with the warm citrus of polished wood. On the freshly made bed sat a small welcome basket, chamomile tea, a soft-bound journal, and a pen that didn't scratch when it wrote. She adjusted the final pillow and straightened the note she'd left on the dresser. You are not a burden. You are a survivor. This room knows the difference. E.M. The doorbell rang at 9:01. Elaine opened it to a woman in her late 60s with perfectly brushed hair and a canvas bag clutched to her chest like armor. Hi, she said, voice tight. I'm Dolores. They said I should talk to you. Elaine smiled and stepped aside. Then let's talk. Dolores moved through the house like someone trained not to touch anything. When she stepped into the suite and saw the bed turned down, she stopped. This is mine? Elaine nodded. For the next 30 days. Dolores blinked fast. Do I pay anything? Should I? No. Elaine's voice was kind but firm. You're not renting. You're recovering. Dolores said nothing, just lowered herself into the armchair beside the bed and touched the teacup like it might vanish. By the second week, she was gardening in the mornings and writing in the evenings. On day 30, she slipped a folded note into the basket before she left. Elaine didn't read it right away, but when she finally did, it simply said, "Thank you for showing me not all families destroy." Then came Gloria, a retired school nurse from Yuba City whose son had secretly refinanced her home behind her back. Then came Marianne, a widow whose daughter had told her, "We just don't have space for you anymore." Then came June, quiet and watchful, who left without speaking much at all, just left behind a single line in her journal. No one knocked on the door and told me to leave. That's enough for now. The stories stacked up like letters to a country Elaine never knew she'd founded. The suite began to run itself, rotating every 30 days, just as planned. Word spread not through press releases, but through whispered testimonies at churches, community centers, even bingo halls. They called it Elaine's room, and no one asked for an address. If you were meant to find it, someone would guide you. Beverly came on as part-time counselor, offering drop-in hours twice a week in the sunroom over hot tea and sugar cookies she insisted on baking herself. Elaine began journaling again. Not out of obligation, but out of rhythm. Her entries weren't about pain anymore. They were about soil, light, pacing. How quiet can be holy, she wrote one night. How some things grow only after they're uprooted. Then, in early fall, she got the letter. It came from the Regional Office of Senior Wellness and Housing Initiatives, typed, formal, but brimming with quiet awe. Dear Ms. Mercer, we've followed your model discreetly for several months. The results speak for themselves, not only in stability metrics, but in testimonials from the women you've housed. Your single-room project has become a whisper network of safety, dignity, and re-entry. We're in the early stages of launching a statewide elder recovery network. We'd like to propose your guest suite as the first pilot location. Elaine stared at the paper. Pilot. They wanted to scale it. Her quiet act of reclamation was now being named, tracked, replicated. She folded the letter and walked to the suite. Sun filtered in like honey. The sheets were fresh again. The next guest would arrive tomorrow, a former librarian whose niece had tricked her out of her pension. Elaine sat on the bed and opened her journal, wrote one line. Some rooms don't close. They bloom. Downstairs, the kettle whistled, and in the duplex across the yard, another porch light flicked on. The woman's name was Alma. She stepped out of the rideshare with a navy overnight bag and a face like paper folded too many times, creased, patient, soft around the edges. Elaine met her at the gate, hands in her pockets, a breeze tugging gently at her sleeves. You must be Alma. Alma nodded. It was either this or a spare cot at my niece's garage with a pit bull who hates me. Elaine smiled, motioning her through. I'll show you the better option. Inside the suite, Alma paused just like the others had, eyes softening at the sight of the turned-down bed, the tea, the journal. But what caught her longest was the painting above the desk, a watercolor of blooming sage and rosemary. I used to grow those, she said, touching the frame lightly. Before everything got tight. Elaine said nothing, just offered her the room and a key. Later that week, after Alma had settled into the rhythms, mornings in the garden, quiet evenings with jazz on the small speaker, she found Elaine seated at the patio table with a cup of chamomile and a faded photo album. I didn't know you were married, Alma said gently, easing into the chair across from her. Elaine didn't look up. I don't talk about him often, not because it hurts, just because the world moved on. Alma waited. Elaine flipped a page and let her fingers rest on a photo of a man with smile lines etched deep and a tie slightly askew. He died 8 years ago, lung cancer, never smoked a day in his life, just unlucky. She paused. He taught social studies, wore that same damn corduroy jacket until the elbows gave out. Would have told me to go easier on Jason probably, then regretted saying it 5 minutes later. Alma reached across the table and squeezed her hand. That night, Elaine lit 3 small candles in the backyard, the rosemary bush freshly trimmed, the dusk clean and windless. She didn't say his name aloud, didn't need to. She simply stood with her hands clasped and whispered into the quiet. Thank you for making room for who I had to become. Alma stood nearby, silent and present. Inside, Elaine's phone buzzed. From Jason Mercer, subject, just this once. She stared at it, a simple white line against the dark screen, no preview text, no pull to open. Instead, she clicked and dragged it into a folder on her desktop labeled Closed Doors. Then she shut the laptop and left it untouched. The next morning, the garden greeted her in bloom. The hyacinth had broken open during the night, violet and heavy, bent with early dew. The tulips had come back without fanfare, bold and shameless. Alma called her from the side path, holding up a single white daisy. I think this one waited for me. Elaine took it and tucked it into a mason jar on the kitchen windowsill. Later, after the beds were watered and the breakfast dishes washed, Elaine pulled a fresh notebook from the shelf. She opened to the first page. Title? Guest Suite. No subtitle yet, no chapters, just a blank sheet. She stared at it for a moment, pen hovering, then wrote the opening line. This house was never haunted, just waiting to be healed. She underlined it once. From upstairs, she could hear Alma humming softly some old tune from another decade. And from outside, the sound of new footsteps on the front path. Elaine rose slowly, notebook in hand, and walked to the door. She didn't open it yet. She just waited, letting the moment bloom. Elaine lit the citronella candles along the garden path one by one, the flames flickering to life beneath the soft glow of string lights overhead. Dusk had settled gently, wrapping the yard in gold. The long picnic table, borrowed from the church around the corner, was draped in linen and surrounded by mismatched chairs. The dishes were already arriving, each with a small card handwritten by the guest or staff who'd brought it. Cornbread, like my grandma used to hide butter in. Bulgur pilaf, first thing I made when I left my husband. Mac and cheese that healed more than hunger. Elaine placed her own dish in the center. Chicken pot pie with thick crust, just like her husband used to request every birthday. She smoothed the card beside it. Built from scratch, like the rest of this. Beverly arrived last, a covered tray in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. She wore her pearls like armor and winked as she passed Elaine. "No paper plates tonight," she declared. "Tonight we dine like the queens we are." Laughter rolled across the yard. They gathered. Past guests, volunteers, counselors, even the young delivery boy who'd quietly dropped off extra food on Sundays when the fridge got tight. Alma sat at the head of the table, now helping run intake calls once a week. Gloria brought apple cake. June sent a card and a photo from Oregon, where she now lived with a neighbor-turned-best friend. Elaine didn't make a speech. She didn't need to. Halfway through the second course, Beverly stood, glass raised. "I've given enough toasts in my day to know when something matters. This ? This matters." She gestured toward Elaine. "To the woman who gave us back our rooms, not just the physical ones, but the ones in our heads, the ones where we stored shame, apology, second-guessing." She walked into those rooms, flipped the light on and said, "Start here." Chairs scraped softly as people stood, glasses lifted. Elaine stayed seated, her eyes glinting in the candlelight. "Sit down," she said wryly. "I don't take compliments standing." Laughter again, softer this time, warmer. They ate. They passed stories like bread baskets, tales of eviction and reinvention, of family that failed and strangers who didn't. At one point, someone put on a playlist of 70s soul, and the entire table swayed in rhythm. By the time the candles burned low and the dishes were scraped clean, Elaine stood alone in the suite. The bed was turned down, sheets crisp and untouched. The journal on the nightstand was blank, waiting for the next voice. She sat gently on the edge of the mattress and inhaled. Lavender, a hint of pine from the sachet Beverly had tucked in the drawer last week. On the desk sat a pale blue envelope. She pulled it close and began to write. "To my great-grandniece, Lila, you don't know this house yet. You're still learning to read, still putting beads on string and chasing butterflies through sprinklers. But one day when you're older, I hope you hear about this place, about how a spare room turned into a starting point. I hope you remember that kindness isn't weakness and that boundaries are just the shape love takes when it's been bruised. And if ever you find yourself at a door, unsure if you belong, remember this. Your room will always be ready, when earned, not inherited, earned. With love that doesn't ask permission, Elaine." She sealed the envelope and placed it inside her binder, tabbed under Legacy. Outside, the porch light clicked on with a quiet hum. Inside, Elaine turned out the sweet lamp, one final time. Then she closed the door behind her. Down the hall, the printer came to life, an intake form quietly spooling for someone else. Someone not yet here, someone almost home. Elaine stood at the back of the room, watching the ribbon fall. The second site, housed in a modest craftsman off Broadway, had that same hush she'd once chased in her own home. Clean corners, sunlight on wood, a welcome mat that actually meant it. A new mural adorned the side wall, painted by a local artist and signed by a dozen former guests in fine silver pen. The room was always real. We just needed a door. There were speeches, of course, state reps, nonprofit heads, a pastor who cried twice, but Elaine didn't speak. She stood next to Beverly, who now wore a staff badge and a calm authority that fit her like Pearl's had. Elaine let her take the spotlight. "You built this," Beverly whispered as the applause rose. Elaine shook her head. "We built a key. They built the rest." She handed Beverly a folder, her last intake files, a transition plan, a sticky note with backup passwords. "You're in charge now." Beverly gave her a long look. "You really letting go?" Elaine smiled. "Not letting go. Just stepping back far enough to see it properly." Her hair was fully silver now, worn short with intention. Her cane had long been replaced with quiet balance and a steadiness earned, not forced. That afternoon, she visited the Lincoln Valley College Library for the first time in nearly a decade. The building still smelled like paper and pine cleaner. She ran her fingers along the spines of books she'd once shelved, lectures she'd once written in the margins of. At the front desk, she handed over a sealed box of rare texts, annotated, preserved, and once part of her private collection. The librarian's eyes widened. "These are... Elaine, some of these haven't been in print for 40 years. "Then let them breathe again," Elaine said. "Put them in hands that might need them." She wandered past the archives, through the newer wing where sunlight made every polished table gleam. A student, maybe 19, with chipped nail polish and a laptop covered in quote stickers, looked up from behind a textbook. "You're her, right?" she asked. Elaine raised an eyebrow. "The house," the girl said. "The rooms. My grandma talks about you like you're a myth. She said you made dignity feel possible." Elaine tilted her head. "I'm just an old teacher with a decent porch." The girl smiled shyly. "How did you get so powerful?" Elaine took a breath, then answered simply, "I got evicted from my own life. Then I walked back in." The girl stared for a beat, then nodded, as if that made more sense than anything she'd read all semester. Elaine left the library in no rush. Back home, the wind had shifted. September's early cool brushed the garden. She paused on the front porch, hand on the banister she'd repainted last spring. The light over the guest suite had been left on, glowing low through the blinds. Inside, the house was clean, quiet, lived in. She walked the hallway one last time, fingertips brushing the photo frames. Some old, some new, none forgotten. At the suite door, she paused. No one was staying there tonight. Elaine stepped in anyway. The air still held lavender. The bed was made. The journal on the nightstand still had half its pages left. She flicked the switch. The room darkened, complete, untouched, whole. The porch light blinked once, then held steady. Downstairs, her binder sat closed on the kitchen table. The legacy tab stuck out slightly. A fresh envelope sat beneath it, addressed simply, "To whoever comes next." Elaine didn't need to reread it. She'd said all there was to say. She locked the front door behind her, stepped onto the porch, and looked up at the sky, pale gold at the edge, bruising toward twilight. Her worth was never up for debate again. It had simply been waiting to be claimed. She booked the suite, then booked their exit, and never checked out of her worth again.